All right, so you know how sometimes you hear about all this political stuff happening and you're like, does this even affect me?
Right.
But this time,
This time it does.
this time it really does. So we're going to deep dive into this
Yes, we are.
crazy House Speaker election.
Yes.
And to set the scene, we have a brand new Congress, a razor-thin Republican majority. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking just a handful of votes. And, of course, President-elect Trump, eager to push through his agenda.
And we all know how important that House of Representatives is, right? I mean, you control the House, you control the legislative agenda, and that translates into power over things like taxes, healthcare, immigration, even what happens to our environment.
So the vote for Speaker was supposed to be like a done deal, right?
Yeah, slam dunk.
Slam dunk for Mike Johnson.
Yep.
But 3 Republicans decided, nah, we're going to vote for somebody else.
Yeah.
And then even more than that, abstained, just said, I'm not voting.
And it really just threw everything into chaos. I mean, we want to talk about a pressure cooker. This kind of tight majority and this open dissent within a party, we haven't seen a House this closely divided in almost a century.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can imagine the tension.
So how did they get it done? I mean, how did they finally break this deadlock?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
President-elect Trump never one to shy away from, being in the spotlight.
Right.
Stepped in, made some last-minute phone calls to those holdout Republicans.
So those are the ones that refused to vote for...
To vote for Johnson initially.
Okay.
And he said, hey, come on, guys, let's get this done. A little arm twisting, maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
But it worked.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really was. I mean,
Yeah.
those calls seem to have been like the deciding factor in getting enough votes to push Johnson over the edge.
Talk about a power move.
Right.
But it wasn't free, was it?
No.
I mean, these holdouts, they had demands.
They did.
They weren't just going to do it because Trump called them up.
Absolutely not. And they laid it all out in a letter, which is actually really fascinating because it gives us a little peek into what the GOP's priorities are for this Congress.
And I think this is where it starts to get really interesting for the average person listening to this.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, because who cares about the ins and outs of...
Backroom deals.
Yeah, like all that stuff. But this is like, okay, this is what they want, and this is how it could affect me.
Exactly. So let's break it down.
Okay.
Top demands: border security, spending cuts, and rolling back Biden-era environmental policies.
All right, so we're not talking about like, theoretical things.
No.
We're talking about things that could actually change people's everyday lives.
Absolutely. I mean, these aren't just abstract political points. These have the potential to, actually change your life.
All right, so let's unpack this letter, because I have a feeling this is where we start to see how this political drama could hit close to home for folks.
Absolutely.
Like you said, rubber meets the road.
It really does. So their top demands: border security, spending cuts, and rolling back Biden-era environmental policies.
All right, let's break those down.
Okay, so first up, border security. They're calling for tougher measures, things like increasing Border Patrol funding, stricter enforcement of immigration laws, and yep, you guessed it, finishing that border wall.
So that was like the signature issue during Trump's presidency, and it seems like it's right back at the top of the agenda.
Back with a vengeance.
But how would this actually impact, like someone listening to this right now, like how could this actually affect their life?
Okay, imagine this. Stricter border controls could make it much harder for people to immigrate legally.
So we're talking about like longer wait times.
Way longer.
For visas.
Visas.
More complicated application processes.
Absolutely.
And potentially even changes to family reunification policies.
All of that's on the table.
So if you have family members trying to come to the U.S. legally, this could create huge obstacles.
Massive roadblocks and delays. It could also mean increased surveillance and enforcement, not just at the border, but potentially within the country, too.
Oh, wow.
Think workplace raids, more scrutiny of documentation, and even profiling based on where you're from or what you look like.
So this raises some serious concerns about civil liberties then.
Absolutely, and civil rights groups are already starting to sound the alarm bells on that one.
Okay, so that's border security. Definitely a lot to unpack there.
It is.
And a lot of potential implications for folks.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one, spending cuts.
Okay.
The holdout Republicans have demanded some pretty serious cuts to government spending.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about trimming a little bit here and there.
Right.
We're talking about deep cuts across the board.
That means things like
Education,
healthcare.
social services, all could be on the chopping block.
What would that look like for someone, say, who relies on these programs? Like, give us an example.
Okay, picture this. Fewer teachers in the classroom.
Oh, wow.
Longer wait times for doctor's appointments.
Oh, man.
Reduced benefits for families that are struggling to make ends meet.
Wow.
Even cuts to programs that help seniors and veterans.
So for people who are already having a tough time making ends meet,
Yeah.
this could be really devastating.
It really could. And it's not just about the individuals.
Right.
These cuts can have ripple effects throughout entire communities, impacting local economies, healthcare systems, social safety nets, the whole 9 yards.
It sounds like there's so much at stake here.
There really is.
Okay, so we've got border security, potential spending cuts.
Yep.
What's the third one again?
All right, so the third big issue is environmental policy.
Right.
The holdout Republicans have been really clear they want to undo a lot of the environmental regulations put in place during the Biden administration.
Right. And, their argument is that those regulations, they stifle economic growth.
Yeah.
They hurt businesses.
They say it's all red tape.
But, of course, Democrats and environmental groups, they say, no, these are vital protection.
Absolutely vital.
We need these for clean air, clean water, tackling climate change, preserving our natural resources.
And they argue that rolling those back could have serious consequences, not just for the U.S., but for the whole planet.
Wow, so this is not just a political debate.
No.
We're talking about the future of our planet here.
We're talking about the health of our planet, the future we're leaving for our kids and grandkids.
Okay, so we've got border security, we've got potential spending cuts, and we've got these environmental policy changes.
Yep, those are the big three.
And it's all coming from this one crazy nail-biter of a House Speaker election.
It really shows you how these political decisions, even the ones that seem kind of procedural, can have massive ripple effects.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive.
Exactly.
Because this is something that could affect everybody.
Everybody.
Okay, so we've set the stage, but I'm already dying to know what happens next.
I know, right? I mean, how do these demands actually play out?
Right, like how do they actually become reality?
And what does that mean for everyday people?
Yeah, and can they even pull it off? I mean, they've got such a slim majority, so we'll have to dig into all that.
Exactly. And that's what we'll delve into next.
Perfect.
We're going to take a closer look at each of those big three issues: border security, spending, and environmental policies. And we'll break down how those potential changes could actually impact you, the listener.
Love it.
We'll explore the arguments from both sides, try to sift through all the noise, and figure out what are the most likely outcomes given this, very precarious political landscape we're in.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into these demands and see how they could actually play out in the real world. We'll start with border security. So the holdout Republicans, they're calling for increased funding for Border Patrol, tougher enforcement of those immigration laws, and completing that border wall.
Okay, so that was a huge issue during Trump's presidency, and it seems like it's back at the top of the agenda. But how would this actually impact someone, say, listening to this right now?
Well, stricter border controls, they could make it much tougher for folks to immigrate legally.
So longer wait times.
Think way longer.
For visas.
Visas for everything.
And more complicated application processes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Much more complicated.
And even potentially changes to family reunification policies.
Oh, yeah. All of that's on the table.
So if you have family members, say, who are trying to come to the U.S. legally, this could create huge obstacles and delays for them.
Yeah, huge roadblocks.
Wow.
It could also mean increased surveillance and enforcement, not just at the border, but potentially within the country, too.
Oh, wow. So,
What,
workplace raids?
Yeah, things like workplace raids, definitely more scrutiny of documentation, and maybe even profiling based on, where you're from or what you look like.
Right, so that raises some serious concerns about civil liberties then.
Oh, absolutely. And civil rights groups are already starting to raise the red flags on this one.
Okay, so that's border security. Definitely a lot to unpack there and a lot of potential implications for folks. Let's move on to the next one, spending cuts.
Okay, spending cuts.
So the holdout Republicans have demanded, pretty deep cuts to government spending.
Yeah, and we're not talking about just trimming a little bit here and there.
Right, like cutting back on paper clips.
Exactly. Yeah, we're talking about deep cuts across the board.
So that means things like, you mentioned before, education.
Education.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, for sure.
Social services, all those could be on the chopping block.
Yeah, all of them could be on the chopping block.
What would that look like for someone, say, who relies on these programs? Give us a concrete example.
Okay, so picture this. Fewer teachers in the classroom.
Oh, wow.
Which means bigger class sizes, less individual attention for students.
Okay.
Longer wait times for doctor's appointments.
Oh, man.
So you're sick, you need to see a doctor, but you gotta wait weeks, maybe even months.
That's terrible.
Reduced benefits for families that are already struggling to make ends meet, put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads,
Wow.
and even cuts to programs that help seniors and veterans.
Yeah, so for people who are already, kind of barely getting by,
Yeah, living paycheck to paycheck.
this could be really devastating.
Absolutely devastating. And it's not just about the individuals either.
Right, right.
These cuts, they can have ripple effects throughout entire communities, impacting local economies, healthcare systems, those social safety nets that people rely on.
So it can affect like the entire fabric of a community.
The whole 9 yards?
Wow, it sounds like there's so much at stake here.
There really is a lot riding on this.
Okay, so we've talked about border security, potential spending cuts. What was that third big one again?
All right, the third big issue that's really come to the forefront is environmental policy.
Right, right.
So these holdout Republicans, they've been very vocal about their desire to roll back a lot of the regulations, those environmental regulations that were put in place during the Biden administration.
And, they say these regulations are hurting businesses, they're stifling economic growth.
Too much red tape, right?
Yeah.
But of course, Democrats and environmental groups, they're pushing back hard. They're
Yeah.
saying, no, 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 these regulations are absolutely essential,
Sure.
societal for protecting our clean air, our clean water, for addressing climate change, preserving our natural resources.
Yeah.
And they're very concerned that rolling back these regulations, it could have really serious consequences, not just for the U.S., but for the entire planet.
So this isn't just, a political debate. We're talking about, the future of our planet here.
We're talking about the health of our planet, the future that we're leaving for our kids, for our grandkids, for generations to come.
Right. And it's interesting how these environmental issues, they can directly impact, people's daily lives in a way that they might not even realize.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, for example, if we have, weaker air quality regulations, that could lead to an increase in respiratory problems, especially for kids and older folks, right?
Exactly. So if you have asthma or other respiratory issues, you're going to feel that directly.
Wow. Yeah.
And then there's a whole issue of climate change, right?
Right.
Rolling back regulations on greenhouse gas emissions that could accelerate the effects of climate change, leading to more extreme weather events.
Right. Things like hurricanes.
Hurricanes, droughts, wildfires, all of that.
Rising sea levels.
Yeah, rising sea levels, huge problem for coastal communities.
And disruptions to agriculture.
Yeah, huge disruptions to agriculture, which then impacts our food supply, food prices. So
Yeah.
it all kind of trickles down.
So these seemingly distant political battles over, environmental regulations, they can actually hit much closer to home than people might realize.
Oh, absolutely. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so we've got these three big issues: border security, spending cuts, and environmental policy, all kind of stemming from this, one crazy House Speaker election.
Yeah, it all goes back to that one vote.
And it's really striking how these political maneuvers in Washington, they can have these real world consequences for people, all across the country.
Yeah, it really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Okay, so we've looked at these potential impacts of these demands.
Yeah.
But now we need to figure out what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, can they actually pull this off?
Right, because they have such a slim majority.
A razor-thin majority.
So let's dive into the political landscape and see how this is all likely to play out. All right, so we've gone through these big demands, right? Tougher border security, deep spending cuts, rolling back environmental regulations. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious agenda.
It is. And, they only have this tiny majority.
Razor-thin.
So can they actually pull this off?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's not just about the numbers. It's
Yeah.
about political strategy. It's about negotiation. And it's about, navigating all those internal divisions within the Republican Party.
Because, we saw how willing those holdout Republicans were to, throw a wrench in the works.
Oh, yeah.
Even when it came to something as basic as electing the speaker.
Exactly. They weren't afraid to hold things up to make their point.
So even though Republicans technically control the House,
Right?
it's like a really tenuous grip on power.
It's a fragile majority, for sure.
Any little disagreement, any little compromise,
And the whole thing could fall apart.
yeah, everything could come crashing down.
Exactly.
So, what does this mean for the Democrats?
Well, this is actually where it gets interesting for them.
Okay.
Because even though they're in the minority,
Right.
they have a surprising amount of leverage here.
So they could actually, influence things.
Absolutely. They can use their votes very strategically
Yep.
to get concessions, to slow things down, to maybe even block legislation that they really don't like.
So it's not just like a one-sided power play.
No, not at all.
There's a real chance for gridlock.
Oh, yeah. Especially on those hot button issues.
Things like immigration,
Immigration, environment,
where the two parties are just like,
miles apart.
yeah, completely different views.
Diametrically opposed.
And this is where I think it gets really important for people listening.
This is where it hits home.
Yeah, because you can't just tune this stuff out.
No.
These political battles, they have real consequences.
Very real consequences.
That go way beyond what's happening in Washington.
Beyond the halls of Congress, absolutely.
We talked about how these potential changes could affect people's health care,
Healthcare, education,
education, even the air we breathe, the stability of our climate.
all of that's at stake.
And this is what politics is really about.
This is the real deal.
It's not just a game the politicians are playing.
No.
It's about people's lives.
Yeah. It's about people's lives. It's about their livelihoods. It's about their future.
And I think that's a really important message for people to hear.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some of the key takeaways that we want to leave people with?
Okay, so first and foremost, just because this House Speaker election might seem far removed from your daily life,
Right.
the policies that are going to come out of this Congress, they have the potential to affect you in really big ways.
Yeah, they could have a direct impact on your life.
Absolutely.
So pay attention.
Yeah, stay informed, stay engaged.
Second takeaway.
Keep a close eye on those debates, those big debates that are happening over border security, over spending, over the environment.
Right.
These are complicated issues with really far-reaching consequences, so it's important to understand all sides of the story, to get informed, to really understand how those different perspectives are going to play out.
And the potential impacts that they could have.
Absolutely. And finally, and this is maybe the most important one, remember that you have a voice in all of this.
You do.
Don't just sit on the sidelines.
Right. Get involved.
Get involved, stay informed, reach out to your elected officials.
Right. Make your voice heard.
Let them know what you think, what you care about.
And talk to people in your community.
Have those conversations.
Yeah, because these are things that affect all of us.
It's all interconnected.
So stay curious, stay engaged.
Absolutely.
Because the future that we're creating,
Yeah,
it really is up to all of us.
it really is.
All right, well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.